Hello everyone. I'm hoping I'm live. Just trying to get Instagram set up as well. Hi Shardy. Hi, so to those of you that are already here, I'm going to wait a couple of minutes before we kick things off. So if you need to make a last minute dash to the loo or make a cup of tea or get comfortable, feel free to do so. And we'll probably kick off in 2 or 3 minutes, I would say. 2 viewers on Instagram, that's exciting. Presuming everyone can hear me okay? It's quite odd looking at 2 versions of your own face at the same time on different screens. Mild narcissism. Hi there, Michelle. Hi, Simon. Thanks for joining. Okay, I'm going to leave it 1 more minute for any last minute stragglers. Great. Okay, let's kick off. Thank you so much for making the time to be here with me this afternoon. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm doing this session for Kings of Theatre Online on Facebook and Instagram at the same time. So I have 2 screens, and I've also got some notes. So if I'm not making eye contact with the camera, please don't be offended. It's just because I'm looking somewhere else. A lot of places to focus my attention. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Oscar French. I've been at the King's Head Theatre for 5.5 years now. I started out working on the front of house, and I've held a lot of different roles since then. It's a small team at the King's Head, which is really, really great because you get the chance to try your hand at lots of different things and discover your strengths and what you like doing. But since the start of 2018, I've been the marketing manager. I really love marketing for the arts. I love that it's an intersection of creative and analytical thinking and strategic thinking as well. So it's really, really cool to get to engage all those different bits of your brain. And I love talking to audiences. I'm as interested in the people off stage as I am in the work that's made on stage, I think. And ultimately, I want audience engagement and loyalty to increase, and I want to help build an audience for the arts in the future. So, yes, this is my first week back at work since March. I've been on the furlough scheme for 7 months, so I've not really had much time to practice marketing, but I have had a chance to look at some theory. So I thought what might be interesting to do today is to talk to you about a subject that I've recently got quite interested in, which is behavioural science. What is behavioural science, you might be wondering? It's a really good question. It's a field of study that looks at the psychological underpinnings of our decision making. So it's research into lots of different areas, so consumer psychology, but patient care and medicine, policy design, and more recently, how best to get people to comply with social distancing measures. But today we're going to be mostly concerned with the economic decision making, which is confusingly a subsection of behavioural science known as behavioural economics. The central contention of this is that human beings are fundamentally irrational in most of the decisions we make because of cognitive biases that we all share but which we're often not aware of. Sorry, my Instagram connection's just gone. Oh no, it's back. So yeah, there are actually 175 different biases that have been identified and categorized so far, which is a lot. Some of them you've probably heard of. Confirmation bias is probably like the most well-known one. That basically means that we are paying more attention or giving more weight to arguments or points of view that support our pre-existing beliefs. So this comes into play in politics, particularly quite a lot of people's political views. But there are some interesting lesser-known ones as well. Rhyme bias is really cool. It makes sense when you think about it, but we're much more likely to believe a statement or pay attention to it if it rhymes. And the fallacy, which is if an argument has an error in it, then we also assume its conclusion is wrong, even though it might be right, because we focus on the error. And the Ikea effect is another good one. So Ikea, they make it really, really hard for you to get their products, in the sense that they're often based out of town and you have to kind of put a day or a morning aside to go there, and then once you get the thing home you actually have to build it. But the Ikea effect is named after Ikea because we tend to feel more ownership and get more enjoyment from things that we build ourselves. So it's not just theoretical. Behavioural economists are interested in how these biases can be used to help people make better decisions. And there are now, believe it or not, behavioural insights teams embedded in governments around the world, and the UK was the first back in 2010. And that's led to all sorts of changes that you may or may not have heard out of. Things like pensions used to be opt-in rather than opt-out, and I don't know if anyone's seen those cigarette butt voting bins on the streets, where you're given two options and you put your cigarette butt in either bin, depending on which view you support, which is kind of encouraging people, I guess, to not drop their butts on the floor, to really, really tiny things like adding a sentence to the page on the organ donor register on the government's website, which has increased the number of people who sign up to be organ donors massively, and it's just the sentence, every day thousands of people who see this page decide to register. I'm going to go a bit more into why that works in a bit. What does this have to do with theatre and theatre marketing, you may well ask? Well, I think we in the arts also want our customers and our audiences to take specific actions. We know this, like we want people to book tickets for our shows and events, we want them to make donations, now we want them to observe social distancing guidelines in our venues. So the ways in which we can understand what might help them make those decisions and nudge them to make the actions we want is an easy win. I think what's great about it, and we're a small theatre, so I understand, it's an approach that can be applied at any scale. Like, you don't need a lot of data or a big budget or a large team to make a tangible difference. So I'm going to take you through 6 specific biases that I think are particularly applicable to us in the arts. You'll probably find that most of these examples are things we do already instinctively. So it's a great way to reassure ourselves that we're doing the right things, but I think also to have a framework against which we can challenge our assumptions and make sure that we're paying attention and doing best practice. There is an argument, and you might be thinking this now, is this not all a bit manipulative? And I'd certainly say that exploiting people's biases can be and is used in unethical ways. So we always need to be aware of that and make sure that that's a line we don't cross ourselves. But ultimately, we're encouraging people to engage with the arts, and I personally think that's good for individuals and for society. Maybe we can talk more about that later. But first of all, the first example I want to give you is choice overload. You're probably familiar with what that means. Essentially, when you give people more options to choose from, they have a harder time deciding, and they're more likely to be less satisfied with their choice and experience regret about their choice. it drains our mental energy. There's a really classic case study about this called the jam experiment. So a group of shoppers were presented with samples from a choice of 6 jams, whilst another group were presented with a choice of 24 different jams. Now you may think initially, oh, I have 24 different jams, I'm much more likely to choose one of them. Well, 30% of the shoppers offered the smaller sample of 6 bought a jam, whereas only 3% of the shoppers that were given 24 made a purchase. So we often have to confront this bias in theatre and the arts, particularly if we're programming a festival or we work in a venue with lots of different shows on at any one time. I mean, the Edinburgh Fringe is the ultimate example, right? I can see hundreds of different shows at any one time. How do I choose? We can combat choice overload by thinking about the ways in which we make it easy for customers to filter options. Online retailers are like really good at this. Like you can, their filtering systems on their websites are really, really specific, and make it easy to kind of dig down into what you actually want. So we should think about this when designing websites and program design as well. And if we're sending out email pushes, I think it's always good to segment more and include less options, like so that the call to actions are really clear. Don't have 14 different ticket price bands either. Yeah, that's choice overload in a nutshell. Number 2 is called the anchoring effect. I think this one's really interesting. So the anchoring effect, it's a device that, or a bias rather, that causes us to rely too heavily on the information that we receive early on in a decision-making process. So what we hear about first kind of becomes our anchor through which we view the rest of the information we're then given. So like plate size and portion size is a really good example. If we're given, if you go to a posh restaurant and you're given a small amount of food on a big plate, we think it's not, when we eat it, we don't feel full. If that same amount of food were given to us on a smaller plate, then it would feel like a full meal. Because the anchor is the plate in that instance, and it applies to pricing too. If I took you into a bookshop and I pointed to a book and said it's worth £50, and then pointed to another book, similar kind, next to it and said, how much do you think that's worth? Your answer would be higher than it would otherwise have been because you're using the £50 as a benchmark. So this really does apply to ticket prices as well. If we're selling tickets to a show and we have, say, a premium ticket, a standard ticket, and a concessionary rate, we are more likely to think that we're getting a good discount on the concessionary ticket if we see the premium price or the standard price first. So it's always good to display from high to low, I guess, or at least to bear that in mind. Cool. Next one is loss aversion. So loss aversion is a bias that means we are more likely to feel the pain of loss than we are the equivalent pleasure of gain. It's different for different individuals, but on average, you tend to feel loss twice as intensely as you feel gain. So if you found 20 quid on the street and then lost it later that day, you're going to feel a lot worse than if you'd never found £20 in the first place, even though financially you're in exactly the same position. So this is exactly how insurance works. They kind of, loss aversion is their business model, essentially. And it's interesting, this was also tried with plastic bags, which now have a small charge in most supermarkets and big shops. In other places, before this was introduced, they also tried giving people a small reward for not using bags, and found that it made no difference, whereas the charge has made a significant difference. It's the loss versus reward thing. Like, loss aversion is a bigger motivator than gain. So in the arts, we want to communicate to our audiences that they have nothing to fear from taking action, and something to fear from not taking action. So we do this quite a lot, using positive reviews, like highlighting things that you may have heard about or people involved in shows that you may have heard before, to kind of to reassure people that there's nothing to fear, but then also creating a scarcity mentality by telling people that there are limited tickets available and that the show's going to end in 2 weeks' time and there's something to fear from not taking action now, to push people towards taking action. 4 of 6. Social proofing. So also known as herd mentality. Basically, we internalize, we are more likely to follow the crowd, even though we all think we're individuals. So if other people are doing something, we are more likely to do it. So there's a classic example published in the Washington Post about this, about energy. Lots of different reasons were given, money-saving incentives were given to customers to save money on their energy bills, but none of them were nearly as effective as telling the customers that 77% of their neighbours were already using energy-saving fans. So that kind of social pressure is actually more effective than financial pressure sometimes. And this is applied a lot by marketeers through the use of customer reviews and testimonials. I don't think we're very good at this one in the arts, as good as we could be, or maybe should be. We allowed word of mouth to happen naturally, but we don't often harness it. I think the power of critics and critical reviews is perhaps diminishing and will continue to diminish. And customer reviewed work is a thing that will, I think, hold more weight than it does now. Individual customer reviews don't hold much sway, but collectively perhaps they could, in the way that TripAdvisor is probably more powerful than restaurant critics are now. Cool. Next up, the ambiguity effect. So this describes how our decision-making process is influenced by how much information we have, and we have an aversion to options for which we feel we're lacking information. So we're more likely, even if it's not going to be objectively the best offer out there, if we've got the information we want, then we're more likely to go for that option. So this is really, really important for right now, and probably for quite a long time to come. You'll notice that venues are being very upfront, and shops and all kinds of public spaces about the measures they've taken to make their space COVID secure. You will be much less likely to want to come out if there's ambiguity about whether or not those measures are in place. Often when we're trying to market things in the arts, we're presenting our customers with a lot of ambiguity, or can be. If you're staging a new play by an unknown writer with an unknown cast, then there's a lot of ambiguity there. I think it's worth bearing in mind. And there's a value to using genre as well. We have a set of stylistic associations for different genres, and we want people to be able to. Excuse me, I've lost my train of thought. I've got a sip of tea. Yeah, so it's a way you can overcome ambiguity. If you're designing a poster or artwork, stylistic associations for different genres, make sure that your poster looks like the genre of work that you're presenting, and people feel more safe about buying into it. The final bias I want to talk to you about is called present bias, and it's a tendency to settle for a smaller reward in the immediate term than to wait for a larger future reward. So it's a trade-off situation, and it describes the trend of overvaluing immediacy over long-term effects. And we all do this all the time in our lives, right? We would rather not exercise now, even if we know we're going to see the results later, or we don't want to save money now. We'd rather spend it in the present and have the reward instantly. And it can make it difficult in the arts to encourage people to book things in advance, because you're spending now, but you're not going to get your reward, which is seeing a show for perhaps months in the future, which is what leads to lots of early bird discounting, of course, because that then brings loss aversion, which we've talked about, into play, and compels us to act now in spite of our present bias. And so another thing I think might be worth considering more is whether we can give ticket bookers or new members or donors some sort of small instantaneous reward that they weren't expecting. Could be an exclusive piece of content or a small discount on the next ticket purchase, to create those positive associations with looking for things in advance and not having to wait for all of your reward. So that's about it in terms of a brief summary of behavioural science, which I think is fascinating. If you're interested in reading more, there are a few books I'd recommend. One called Nudge, Thinking Fast and Slow, or Predictable Irrationality. They're all really, really interesting. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I am more than willing to answer, if I can. Yes. Someone has asked me to quickly repeat the last one. Yeah, so present bias I was talking about, which can put people off booking for things in advance because you're not going to see the return on the money you've spent for a long time. So I think it's worth looking at ways that you can give something to people in the short term, be it content or discount, or there are lots of different options. A letter, perhaps if a member signs up, what immediate benefit do they get? Any others? Hi, honey. Honey's a person, by the way. I'm not saying hi, honey, to myself. Thank you. I'm glad you found it helpful. Yeah, if you are interested, I would spend some time on Google. There's a whole ton of websites out there. A lot of consultancies have been set up to give insights to large businesses on how they can make use of behavioural economics and nudges. So you could do that. There's the Decision Lab, a website called the Decision Lab has a breakdown of all 175 different biases and examples of where they happen, which is, if you're really interested, you could go through those. If there's no more questions, I may wrap up a bit early. I should say there's an archive of Kings of Theatre Online content on our website. Some of the ones I particularly enjoyed are Shadi Khosravi Rad on Marketing 101, which is a great kind of compliment, I guess, to the stuff we've talked about. Rebecca Pitt did a great one on theatre posters, and Georgia Attlesey did a fantastic, fascinating talk on creative producing and freelance careers in the arts. So just some top tips for what to watch there, but they're all on there. We've been doing these since March, so there's quite a long backlog on absolutely every subject within the theatre that you could think. I've had a couple more questions. What do you think is at play when people leave it to the very last minute to book? Good question. I don't plan my life personally more than a week in advance, and in the present world we're used to instant gratification, and we're used to being able to get what we want without having to think and prepare. Whereas theatre, because of the limited number of seats we have for events, it's still often the case that you have to book further in advance than you otherwise would for other things. So often, yeah, I guess that's what I think. I don't know what it's. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head really. I think last minute booking is a growing trend. and it's something obviously for obvious reasons we as marketeers want to stop happening. We want to encourage people to book in advance if we can. Cool. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining today, and have a great afternoon. I know I will. Cheers. Bye everyone.